Hey everybody, welcome to Therapy Today. I have a really special guest today, Dr. Leonaura Rhodes. She was a doctor in the UK. Now she is a neurofeedback therapist here in the States, as well as a brain health coach. And I have her on the platform today to share her story, not as a doctor, but as a parent, and talking about her journey as a parent with a child struggling with a chronic illness. So Dr. Rhodes, thank you so much for being here today. We're going to have all of your links for your Instagram and your main page in the description below. So for anyone who's interested in your coaching and therapy services, they'll be able to follow up on that in the links in the description. But thank you so much for being here today.
You're very welcome. I'm delighted to be here.
So tell me a little bit, what was it like for you, both as a mother and a doctor, raising a child who is struggling with a chronic illness?
I mean, of course, you don't start out that way. Both
Yeah.
both of my kids, and by the way, I have two young adult sons now who are in their mid-20s, and things were great from the very beginning with both of them. My eldest son, I was working as a public health doctor when he was born, and everything was great until he was 5 months of age. I went back to work, and he went into a nursery school. And at the end of the first week, he got sick, and he continued to get sick practically every 2 weeks for the next several months. And then he got chickenpox, encephalitis, and pneumonia, and nearly died. And there was some medical mismanagement that went on as well, which was really hard I was a physician, and when your child is sick, it's very disempowering. I was completely exhausted. I'd had a really sick child for over a week, and I'd barely slept during that time. And trying to stay empowered and rational, they probably thought I was a bit crazy at times. The sleep deprived crazy woman who was making demands about her child, telling the doctors, "You've got to believe me that he's sick." And it was a horrible period. And he then went on to, continue to get sick. And his pediatrician basically said to me, "You have to stop working, otherwise he may die." And it's a super hard decision to make. You train, for many years to become a doctor, and I loved what I was doing, and I was good at it, and it gave me a lot of fulfillment. But I'd always wanted to be a parent, and that was even more important. So when he said that, I gave up work. And my intention was, my employer, I was working for the NHS in the UK at the time, and they kept my job open for me. It was pretty remarkable. They said, come back anytime you like. And so that was my plan, when I got him fit and healthy. And then I fell pregnant with my second son. And I was really determined not to be a neurotic, hypervigilant parent when my second son came along. Uh-huh. And he was a very difficult infant. He cried all the time, and didn't sleep very well. And he used to do this thing where he would froth at the mouth, and everybody in the family would joke about it. It's like he's blowing bubbles. And then one day we had been out as a family, and he was in his car seat, and he actually hadn't been crying for about 30 minutes. My husband and I were like, wow, maybe this has stopped. And I looked over at him, and he was blue and unresponsive.
Oh, wow.
And not breathing. And I resuscitated him. It transpired he had one of the worst cases of reflux they'd ever seen. And he was basically aspirating. He was kind of choking on stomach acid. Wow. And he was resuscitated a total of 11 times, that two by me, and the other times in hospital. And then he had seizures while he was in hospital as well.
Wow. And
he was in for 2 weeks. I developed pneumonia while I was in hospital as well. I was being exposed to lots of bugs, I guess, in there, and I was sleep deprived, and it was a terrible time. And he then went on to remain unwell for about 2 or 3 years after that. And he wore an apnea alarm, where it kind of keeps an eye on their breathing, and so the alarm would probably go off, 5 or 6 times a night, and I
Wow.
would run and check that he was okay. And I had I probably had about 5 years of waking up every morning and thinking, I wonder if he's dead. It was an
Wow.
awful feeling. I
Yeah.
wouldn't wish it upon anybody. I mean, every parent worries about that, but when you have experienced,
Hmm.
having to resuscitate your child, it's very real, and it was truly truly awful experience.
Yeah, that sounds terrifying, and I can't imagine even being able to rest peacefully at night knowing that
Yeah.
that alarm might go off any second.
Yes, absolutely. And it wasn't helped by the fact because he had his, final diagnosis was severe reflux. It
Mm.
meant that I had to feed him every 2 hours during the night
Wow.
up until he was about 4 years old. So,
Hmm.
even when he was sleeping peacefully, I would have to wake him up and feed him. So I did not sleep through the night until he was 6 years old.
Wow. That's really amazing. And when you're talking about being faced with the choice of, like you said, having worked so hard to make it in the medical field and then having to make that difficult choice between being at home versus
Yeah.
continuing on in your career. And one detail that you mentioned really struck me is that
Mm.
when you were with your first son, I believe, it sounded like even you had difficulty convincing the doctors that there was something wrong, despite
Yeah.
your training.
Yeah. I was accused of Munchausen's by proxy
Oh,
by
wow.
one of the and it was so we took him home. He had chickenpox. He had chickenpox, and he'd been unconscious for a day when I took him in.
Huh.
And of course, and this was in February in England, so it was cold.
Hmm.
By the time we got to the hospital, he perked up because it was cold out. We
Uh-huh.
take car, and then we had to get out in the car in the parking lot of the hospital. So by the time he got there, he was he was perking up a bit. But the doctor said to me, she said, your child has chickenpox, and kids are sick when they have chickenpox. You're being neurotic. And
Hmm.
she said on Monday you need to see a psychiatrist. There's something very wrong with you. And I said, well, that's fine, but I am not leaving until he's been admitted to hospital overnight. And
Wow.
so she reluctantly let us stay one night, but then kicked us out on the Saturday morning.
Hmm.
On the Monday morning, so then on the Sunday, my husband went into my son's room and he found him blue and unresponsive.
Yeah.
And when we took him into hospital, his oxygen saturation was 80%, which if anybody knows about these things, it's very, very low. He
Hmm.
was nearly dead. And so we took him in and they found he had encephalitis, which is chickenpox. He had chickenpox on his brain, basically.
Wow.
And so he was admit they kind of realized he was really sick at that stage. And on the Monday morning, I hear shouting in the corridor outside of his room. And then the consultant kind of comes into the room and he said, I'm so sorry for what happened to you. That was extremely negligent of my team, and they
Wow.
should have believed you. And we were so lucky. If we hadn't have lived so close to the hospital, I really think he would have died.
Wow.
It's dreadful. So yeah, and the doctor actually said to me, you're clearly missing being a doctor, and you're trying to get attention. I'm like, this, having trained as a doctor and worked in the ER, there was no way I wanted to spend a Friday evening in the
No.
ER,
No.
in London. It was just like not what was on my agenda at the
And
time. So
nobody needs
yeah.
attention that badly.
I know exactly, and like you say, it was really shocking that even me, who had, and I'd worked in that hospital, I'd worked on
Wow.
that team, and to be treated in that way just made me realize how common that must be for other people to be treated that way.
And
Yeah.
so, how did you feel through all these experiences? What were some of the hardest times for you?
Well, so there was a mixture of like the physical, the complete
Hmm.
and utter exhaustion,
Yeah.
and I kept getting sick as well, with just infections. I wasn't sleeping. And back then, I think we didn't realize how important sleep is for
Hmm.
mental and physical health. So there was the physical stuff going on, but then there was the mental stuff as well. And I was scared all of the time. I was totally hypervigilant, and hypervigilant being this kind of state of being constantly thinking something bad is going to happen. And it's an exhausting state to exist in. Funny story, when my youngest son was eventually released from hospital, and we had a period of about 3 months when he was well. We went on vacation, and we had to take oxygen with us. Wow. And so we had like this oxygen canister in case he needed to be resuscitated. And my husband says to me, go and do a yoga class. You really need a break. So I go off to do this yoga class, and I'm coming back all kind of happy and relaxed. And there's an ambulance outside of our hotel room. And it was like a little cottage. And, at this point I start running and I'm like, I don't believe this. This is, how can this happen? And it turned out that the hotel had a responsibility to check the oxygen tank. So they'd kind of sent an ambulance to come and check the oxygen. But you can imagine what that was like. I was only just starting to kind of, get used to the situation. And then that happened. It just felt really cruel.
For sure. So I know a lot of this seems to have been when your children were younger. What was it like as they got older? And if they don't mind you sharing, how are they doing now?
Yeah, I've actually spoken to them about what I'm okay to share. And so, that was those incidences were in their infancy. Unfortunately, both of them then went on to have chronic health problems, which thankfully, oh my goodness, knock on wood, are now resolved. And they're both very fit and well, but they also had some developmental delay, I think because of what had happened to both of them. And so we had a lot of struggles with school and a lot of interventions and everything. And, I think it took a toll on my mental health. I think that level of kind of extreme stress. And it's very interesting. A lot of the research on PTSD is done in war veterans, people who've been in active military situations. Another big body of research has been done in parents of special needs children or children with chronic health problems, because it's a similar situation where you're constantly vigilant. You're constantly waiting for the shoe to drop and the next thing to go wrong. And everybody has those thoughts, but when you have that much evidence as well to back it up, that the thought that bad things happen to me and my children, the evidence was up here.
It's not that far off.
Yeah, exactly. And so it made me very anxious, chronically stressed, and it really took a huge toll on my mental health. I would say I had pretty significant anxiety and depression for probably 10 years altogether, and with maybe a gap in between. I took medication on a couple of occasions, and I had an aha moment. My youngest son was still in a stroller, and I went for a walk into the town that we lived in England, and thrift shops are a really big thing in England. And I was just like looking through the bookshelves, and a book kind of it was like leapt out of me, this book, and it was called The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama. And it's a wonderful book, and there was a story in there about a mother who'd lost her only child, and she went to the Buddha and begged for her child to be returned to her. And he said, if you bring back mustard seeds from 3 families that have had no suffering and no loss, I will give you your child back. And of course she couldn't find anybody. And I remember, at this stage, I was probably 4 years into, pretty severe chronic stress. And I'd also been chronically stressed as a junior doctor as well. I found that very, very hard, sleep deprivation, very intense workload, etc. And I remember sitting reading this story and realizing that I was creating a lot of my own suffering, and that bad things had happened to me, but you have a choice, and that you can recover and you can bounce back and you can become mentally strong. I'm so glad. I say that book saved my life.
Wow. That's really amazing. And I think it gets misinterpreted a lot when counselors or therapists or doctors say that we create our own suffering. So I want to give you a chance to clarify that a little bit about what
Yeah,
that means for you, and what would you tell other parents who are going through similar struggles that you went through?
absolutely. So I think, a certain amount of suffering when bad things are happening, when you're experiencing difficult situations, when your kids are sick, or if you experience loss, it is completely biologically normal to be stressed,
Yeah.
to feel physical and emotional pain and mental pain from that in the acute phase. But once the acute phase is over, we can have more control over it. We can choose how we see what is going on. We can choose the perspective we bring to it. We can choose the actions that we take, based off what is going on. And I'm totally against toxic positivity. I kept having people say to me, "You've had all your bad luck now. You'll be okay now." It's like, how on earth could you possibly know that? That's a really dumb thing to say.
It
And
really
as a
doesn't
doctor,
work with chronic illness either.
no, exactly. And as a doctor, I saw families who had, like, they seemed to get everything. Like, every person in the family seemed to just be, blessed with bad luck. And so, that would really, when people would say things like that, that would really bother me.
Yeah.
But, what I learned was that when I would notice that I was in a spiral of negative thinking, ruminating, which just means, kind of going over the same thought over and over again. When I caught myself in those moments, I had a choice. And I learned that, to take a break, to change your state. And the most powerful way that I have found is, for me, it's mindfulness practice, meditation, but also for me, very profoundly, getting out in nature. I'm a nature photographer for fun, and and for me, that being present in nature and being in awe of the magnificence of the planet that we live on. I was watching sparrows this morning before my first call, and these cute little birds just hopping around without a care in the world, and just looking at the sky and just looking at the magnificence of this planet that we live on. Things like that shift allows you to activate a totally different part of your brain, and I call it the sage brain. In the sage brain is the prefrontal cortex. It's your higher functioning part of your brain, and it is wise, and it is calm and clear-headed. It's not Pollyanna. It's not, like I was saying, it's not toxically positive, but it's focused on, what can I do in this moment? What can I do to be okay and to help those around me? And also questioning, are my thoughts true? And I've heard it said that we have 6,000 thoughts a day, and then there's other research that says we have 60,000, but it's a lot of thoughts we have every day. And many of them are not true. They're just plain untrue, because we have this imperfect brain.
Sure.
And being able to kind of challenge that and say, what is true here? And then focusing on what you can do to improve your situation, to take some control back. And that's kind of been my mechanism of learning to cope with all of this.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, especially having someone who's been through so much, and especially, like you said, 5 or 6 years where it was just very, very intense. And I'm sure it didn't let up too much after that either, but that connection with something beyond ourselves really seemed to be a key factor for you.
Absolutely.
Well, Dr. Rhodes, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. I'm so glad that your kids are in a better situation right now than they started in. So for all of you who are watching, I would encourage you to check out Dr. Rhodes' content. Like I said, the links will be in the description below. Please do like and subscribe so we can continue to grow this channel and continue to bring on guests like this to share their stories of mental health and their lives. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you all next time.